I never expected my future mother-in-law to show up at my doorstep with 2 massive suitcases and a look that said she wasn't leaving anytime soon. But there she was, Margaret Sullivan, standing in the golden light of an autumn evening, her pearl necklace gleaming like armor. My name is Emily, and until that moment, I thought I had my life perfectly arranged. A beautiful 9-year-old daughter, a wonderful fiancé, and a cozy 3-bedroom house that was finally starting to feel like home. Then Margaret happened. "Emily, dear," she said, brushing past me into the entryway. Her Chanel perfume lingered in her wake, heavy and intrusive. "Jack didn't tell you I was coming? I'm having some work done on the house, and he insisted I stay with you both rather than at a hotel." I stood there, door handle still in my grip, watching as she surveyed our living room with the practiced eye of someone looking for dust on baseboards. Jack hadn't mentioned anything about his mother coming to stay. Not a word. "How long will the work take?" I managed to ask, closing the door slowly, as if delaying it might somehow make this situation less real. "Oh, indefinitely," Margaret replied, running a manicured finger along our coffee table. "These things are so unpredictable. Contractors, you know how they are." She paused, examining her fingertip. "You might want to invest in a better cleaning service, dear." From upstairs, I heard Chloe's bedroom door open. "Mom, who's here?" Before I could respond, Margaret's face transformed into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Is that my future granddaughter? Chloe, sweetheart, come give Grandma Margaret a hug." I watched my daughter descend the stairs, her expression uncertain. She'd only met Margaret twice before, at formal family dinners where Margaret had barely acknowledged her existence. Now she was Grandma Margaret? "Hi," Chloe said quietly, accepting a brief hug that left a lipstick mark on her cheek. She quickly retreated to my side, her hand finding mine. "Where's Jack?" Margaret asked, already heading toward the guest room as if she'd lived here for years. "I assumed he'd be home by now. He's teaching late today," I said, following her with Chloe in tow. "Usually doesn't get home until 7 on Thursdays." Margaret clicked her tongue. "Working so late? That's not like him at all. He always made it home for family dinner when he was younger." I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, but couldn't check it with Margaret's eyes on me. "The guest room is this way," I said, gesturing down the hallway. "Though we weren't expecting company, so it might need—" "Oh, don't worry about that," Margaret interrupted, wheeling her suitcases into the room. "I brought my own sheets. Hotel-quality Egyptian cotton. I can't risk any allergic reactions to whatever detergent you use." My phone buzzed again. Margaret began unpacking, pulling out enough clothes to last a month. Each piece was methodically hung in the closet, her movements precise and deliberate, like she was establishing territory. "Mom," Chloe whispered, tugging at my sleeve. "Can I go back to my room?" I nodded, watching her retreat upstairs before finally checking my phone. 2 messages from Jack. "Mom's house flooded. She might need a place to stay for a few days. Sorry, meant to tell you earlier. In a faculty meeting. Call you soon." I looked back at Margaret, who was now arranging framed photos of Jack as a child on the guest room dresser. She caught my eye in the mirror's reflection and smiled that same hollow smile. "We're going to have such a wonderful time together, Emily. It'll be like we're already family." Something in her tone made my skin crawl. This wasn't just about a flooded house. I could feel it in my bones. Margaret Sullivan had a plan, and somehow, I knew my carefully built life was about to be turned upside down. It took exactly 3 days for Margaret to completely reorganize my kitchen. I stood in the doorway that morning, coffee cup frozen halfway to my lips, staring at the unfamiliar arrangement of my own space. Every cabinet had been rearranged, every drawer reorganized according to what she called proper kitchen logic. "Much better, isn't it?" Margaret's voice floated from behind me. "Now everything has its proper place. I noticed you had your spices mixed in with your baking supplies. That's no way to run a household, dear." I set my coffee down before I could throw it. "Where are Chloe's lunch containers?" "Oh, those plastic things?" Margaret wrinkled her nose. "I put them in the basement storage. Really, Emily, BPA-free or not, plastic is so common." I ordered some lovely glass containers that should arrive today. Before I could respond, Chloe came bounding down the stairs. "Mom, I can't find my blue sweater." "I took the liberty of doing some laundry," Margaret chimed in. "That sweater was looking rather worn. I've ordered her some new ones from Nordstrom. Much more suitable." Chloe looked at me, her eyes wide with concern. That sweater was her favorite, a gift from her father before he passed away. I felt my hands trembling as I gripped the counter. "Margaret, I appreciate your help, but Jack always said his ex-girlfriend Caroline was so organized. Margaret interrupted, busying herself with the coffee maker. She had such a natural talent for homemaking. Did he ever mention her to you? The kitchen suddenly felt too small. No, he hasn't. Oh, Margaret's surprise seemed rehearsed. They dated for 5 years, you know. Such a shame it didn't work out. Her family has such good breeding. Just then, Jack walked in, already dressed for work. He kissed my cheek, then froze, looking around the kitchen. What happened in here? Your mother reorganized, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. And apparently threw out some of our things. Not thrown out, dear. Simply relocated to more appropriate spaces, Margaret corrected, beaming at Jack. Remember how Caroline used to organize everything so beautifully in your old apartment? Jack's expression tightened. Mom, that was years ago. And Emily's system works perfectly fine for us. Of course it does, sweetheart, Margaret patted his cheek. I'm just trying to help Emily become more suitable for our family's standards. The word suitable hung in the air like poison. Chloe, who had been quietly watching this exchange, suddenly spoke up. I liked Mom's kitchen better before. And I want my sweater back. Margaret's smile didn't waver. Children should be seen and not heard, dear. Emily, you really should teach her proper manners. I watched Chloe's face fall, and something inside me snapped. Jack, can we talk? Privately? In our bedroom. I paced while Jack sat on the edge of our bed. This isn't working, I said. She's completely taking over our home, criticizing everything I do, and now she's hurting Chloe. She's just trying to help, Jack sighed. You know how she gets. She'll settle down soon. Will she? Because right now she's throwing out our things and talking about your ex-girlfriend like she's the one who should be here instead of me. Jack ran a hand through his hair. Emily, come on. That's not fair. Not fair. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What's not fair is watching your mother systematically dismantle our life while you stand there letting it happen. From downstairs, we heard Margaret's voice. Chloe, darling, proper young ladies don't eat sugary cereals for breakfast. Let Grandma Margaret make you some steel-cut oats instead. Jack stood up, checking his watch. I have to get to class. We'll talk about this later, okay? As he headed for the door, I called after him. That sweater she took? It was from Chloe's father. Her dead father, Jack. He paused, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. I'll talk to her about it tonight. But I knew he wouldn't. And as I listened to him say goodbye to his mother downstairs, heard her sugary sweet voice telling him to have a wonderful day, I realized something that chilled me to my core. This wasn't just about Margaret trying to help. This was about her trying to erase me completely. I never meant to follow Margaret that Tuesday afternoon. But when I saw her slipping into her Mercedes while supposedly resting with a migraine, something made me grab my keys. Maybe it was the way she'd been whispering on her phone all morning, or how she'd smiled too sweetly when telling me she couldn't possibly help with Chloe's school pickup. The cafe she pulled up to was one of those trendy places downtown, all exposed brick and overpriced lattes. I parked across the street feeling ridiculous, like I was playing at being a private investigator in some bad movie. Then I saw her, Caroline, Jack's ex-girlfriend, perfect as ever in her designer suit, walking through the cafe door. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Through the cafe window, I watched Margaret embrace Caroline like a long-lost daughter. They sat at a corner table, heads close together, Margaret's hand patting Caroline's arm with maternal affection she'd never once shown me. My phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. Coffee? I'm downtown and could use a friend. I typed back quickly. Perfect timing. Come to brick and mortar. But park around back. I'll explain when you get here. Lisa arrived 15 minutes later, sliding into my passenger seat. Okay, what's with the cloak and dagger routine? Oh. She followed my gaze to the window. Is that Jack's mother and his ex-girlfriend having what appears to be a very cozy lunch? Yes. Holy shit, Lisa whispered. How long have they been there? About 20 minutes. Long enough for Margaret to show Caroline what looks like wedding venues on her phone. Lisa's head snapped toward me. What? I can read Margaret's tablet screen from here. She's scrolling through the same venues she's been pushing Jack and me to consider. My voice sounded distant, even to myself. Except now she's showing them to his ex. Through the window, we watched Margaret pull something from her purse, a small velvet box. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with surprise. That's his grandmother's ring, I said quietly. The one Margaret's been keeping safe, until Jack and I set a date. Emily. Lisa's hand found mine. You need to tell Jack. Tell him what? That I followed his mother like a stalker? That I'm watching her have lunch with his ex? I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. He'll think I'm paranoid. Or worse, he'll defend her again. Margaret was speaking animatedly now, gesturing with her hands the way she did when she was excited about something. Caroline nodded, wiping what looked like tears from her eyes. My phone buzzed again. Jack, Mom says she's not feeling well. Could you check on her? Perfect timing, I muttered, showing Lisa the message. What are you going to do? I started my car. I'm going home. And when Margaret returns, I'm going to ask her about her miraculous recovery and lovely lunch date. Emily, wait. Lisa grabbed my arm. Don't confront her alone. Let me come with you. But I was already pulling away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I saw Margaret and Caroline hugging goodbye, both smiling like they shared the world's best secret. At home, I waited in the kitchen. When Margaret walked in an hour later, she froze for just a second before recovering her composure. Oh, Emily dear. I was just out picking up some medicine for my headache. I set my phone on the counter, screen up, showing the photo I'd taken of her and Caroline. Interesting pharmacy you went to. The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable, a flash of calculation behind her eyes. You followed me? You're trying to replace me with Caroline. Margaret's laugh was soft, almost pitying. Replace you? Oh, Emily. You can't replace something that was never truly established to begin with. The words hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to hold her gaze. Does Jack know you're meeting his ex? Jack knows what he needs to know. Margaret moved closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. And what he needs to know is that there are better options out there. More suitable options. For both him and Chloe. I felt the blood drain from my face. Leave my daughter out of this. Your daughter needs a proper family, dear. And you? Well, you're just not it. She turned and glided out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, shaking with rage and fear. Because now I knew, this wasn't just about Jack anymore. This was about my entire family. That night, I packed 2 small suitcases while Chloe slept. My hands shook as I folded her favorite pajamas, the ones with unicorns that Margaret had deemed childish. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of Margaret's television downstairs, playing some old black and white movie I didn't recognize. My phone lit up with a text from Lisa. Guest room's ready whenever you need it. I stared at the message, unable to type a response. The thought of leaving made me feel simultaneously like a coward and a failure. But Margaret's words about Chloe kept echoing in my head. Your daughter needs a proper family. A soft knock at my bedroom door made me jump. Mom! Chloe stood there in her nightgown, looking smaller than her 9 years. Are we going somewhere? Before I could answer, Margaret's voice drifted up from the bottom of the stairs. Chloe, darling, is everything all right? I heard footsteps. I quickly pushed the suitcases under the bed. Everything's fine, Margaret, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Chloe just had a bad dream. Oh dear. Margaret's footsteps started up the stairs. Let Grandma Margaret help. I used to comfort Jack after his nightmares all the time. Chloe backed away from the door, pressing against me. I don't want her help, she whispered. Margaret appeared in the doorway, wrapped in an expensive silk robe. You know, Caroline is wonderful with children. She's a pediatric nurse now. Perhaps she could come visit? Give you a break, Emily. You look so tired lately. The casual cruelty of her suggestion made my chest tight. Chloe, honey, go back to bed. I'll be there in a minute. Once Chloe was gone, Margaret's sympathetic smile dropped. Running away in the middle of the night? How dramatic. And rather selfish, don't you think? How did you? Please. She waved dismissively at the partially visible suitcase under the bed. I've been watching you unravel for days. It's exactly what I expected. What you expected. Or what you planned. Margaret stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. I simply created the conditions. You're the one proving you're not strong enough for this family. My phone buzzed again, Jack this time. Late faculty meeting. Don't wait up. Margaret glanced at my phone screen and smiled. Oh, that's right. Jack's having dinner with the dean tonight. Although, she paused, examining her manicured nails. I believe Caroline mentioned she might stop by the university to say hello. Pure coincidence, of course. The room spun slightly. You're orchestrating all of this. I'm protecting my son. And my granddaughter-to-be. Her voice hardened. Chloe deserves stability. A mother who doesn't run away when things get difficult. Someone like Caroline. Get out. My voice was barely a whisper. Think carefully about your next move, Emily. If you leave tonight, you prove everything I've told Jack about you. But if you stay, she smiled that hollow smile again. Well, we'll see how long you last. After she left, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the half-hidden suitcases. My phone buzzed one more time, a photo from an unknown number. It showed Jack and Caroline at a restaurant, sitting close together, her hand on his arm. Margaret's message followed. He deserves better. They both do. I deleted the photo with trembling fingers and walked to Chloe's room. She was awake, clutching her stuffed rabbit, another item Margaret had tried to dispose of. "Mom!" Her voice was small in the darkness. "Are we leaving?" I sat on the edge of her bed, running my fingers through her hair. "No, sweetheart. We're not leaving. But Margaret is not going to win." I surprised myself with the firmness in my voice. "This is our home, our family, and I'm done letting her make us feel like we don't belong." Chloe sat up and hugged me tight. "Promise, promise." I held her close, my mind already forming a plan. Margaret wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd forgotten something crucial. I had nothing left to lose, and everything to protect. Tomorrow, I would stop reacting and start fighting back. And Margaret Sullivan was about to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate are the most dangerous of all. The family dinner was my idea, a last desperate attempt to clear the air. I spent hours preparing Jack's favorite lasagna, setting the table with the good china Margaret had gifted us last Christmas. Even Chloe helped, carefully arranging flowers in the centerpiece while shooting nervous glances toward the kitchen where Margaret hovered. "The sauce seems a bit acidic," Margaret commented, dipping a silver spoon into the pot. Caroline always used her grandmother's recipe. Such a lovely, traditional approach. I gripped the counter, counting breaths. "The sauce is fine, Margaret." The doorbell rang. Jack walked in with a bottle of wine, but my relief at seeing him vanished when I noticed who followed. Caroline. Perfect as ever in a black cocktail dress. "Hope you don't mind," Jack said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mom mentioned she'd invited Caroline, said it would be nice to catch up." Margaret's smile was triumphant. "More the merrier, right, Emily?" Chloe pressed against my side. "Mom!" "It's okay, sweetie," I whispered, though nothing felt okay. "Why don't you go wash up for dinner?" The meal started quietly enough. Caroline chatted about her pediatric practice while Margaret beamed. Jack seemed fascinated by his plate. I pushed food around, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. "Emily," Margaret said, setting down her wine glass. "Didn't you say you were a translator before? What happened with that career?" "I still am a translator." "Oh!" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "I thought you'd given it up." After the incident, the room went still. Jack looked up sharply. "What incident?" "It's nothing," I said quickly, but Margaret was already pulling out her phone. "Strange, because I was doing some research." She scrolled through something. "There was quite the scandal at your old publishing house, wasn't there? Something about manipulated translations? Changed endings?" My hands began to shake. "That's not what happened. The article says differently." Margaret's voice dripped false concern. "Jack, dear, did you know about this? About how Emily lost her position after altering authors' works without permission." "I never altered anything," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "There was a misunderstanding with one manuscript." "3 manuscripts," Margaret corrected, "according to this article. And a lawsuit that was settled out of court." She turned to Jack. "I'm only bringing this up because I care about you, sweetheart. About your reputation at the university. These things have a way of reflecting poorly on." "Stop." Jack's voice was quiet but firm. "That's enough, Mom." Margaret blinked innocently. "I'm only trying to protect." I said stop. Jack stood up, his chair scraping back. "Emily, is this why you switched to freelance work?" I nodded, unable to speak. The truth was Messier, a vengeful senior editor, translations that were actually correct but politically inconvenient, a company that needed a scapegoat. But explaining felt impossible under Margaret's triumphant gaze. "Well," Caroline spoke up, "integrity is so important in academia. If there are questions about Emily's professional ethics." "There aren't." Jack's response was immediate. He moved to stand behind my chair, his hand finding my shoulder. "And if there were, they'd be between Emily and me. Not my mother, not my ex-girlfriend, and certainly not the dinner table." Margaret's face hardened. "Jack, be reasonable. With your tenure review coming up, I think it's time for everyone to leave." Jack's voice left no room for argument. Caroline stood first, gathering her purse. This was enlightening. "Mom," Jack said quietly. "You too." Margaret rose slowly, her expression dangerous. "You're choosing her?" "After what I've just revealed, I'm choosing my family." Jack squeezed my shoulder. "All of it, including you if you can accept that. But this ends now." After they left, I sat frozen, waiting for questions, accusations, anything. Instead, Jack knelt beside my chair and took my hands in his. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it was humiliating," I whispered. "And finished. Until your mother decided to weaponize it." From the doorway, Chloe's small voice. "Is Grandma Margaret going to make us leave?" Jack pulled her into a hug. "No, sweetheart. If anyone's leaving, it's Grandma Margaret." But looking at his face, I knew this wasn't over. Margaret had played her trump card, and even though it hadn't worked as she'd planned, she wouldn't stop here. This was just the beginning. The family cabin was supposed to be our escape. Jack suggested the weekend getaway after the dinner disaster, a chance to reset and reconnect. What I hadn't expected was Margaret announcing she'd join us, claiming the cabin had always been a Sullivan family tradition. Now I stood in the rustic kitchen, watching through the window as Margaret walked with Jack along the lake shore. Her hand on his arm, just like Caroline's had been at that restaurant. They were too far away to hear, but Margaret's body language told the story. The concerned tilt of her head, the maternal touch. The way she kept stopping to make her points more emphatic. "Mom!" Chloe's voice made me jump. "Grandma Margaret said my room used to be Dad's when he was little. She said everything here belongs to their family." I gripped the counter. "This isn't about belonging, sweetie. It's about..." The cabin door opened, and Jack walked in alone. His expression was unreadable. "Chloe," he said quietly, "could you go unpack your books? I need to talk to your mom." After she left, Jack paced the small living room. "Mom's been talking to the tenure committee." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What?" "Apparently, she's friends with the chairman's wife. She told them about your professional history. Suggested it might reflect poorly on the department. She's trying to destroy your career now." My voice cracked. "Because of me?" "She says she's protecting me." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "She's arranged a meeting with the committee next week. Wants me to reconsider certain life choices before then." The implication hung heavy in the air. Outside, I could see Margaret watching through the window, her face a mask of maternal concern. "I won't let her manipulate you like this," I said, moving toward the door. But Jack caught my arm. "Emily, wait. There's more." He looked pained. "She's filed for partial custody of Chloe." The world stopped. "What?" "She's claiming she has concerns about your stability. The publishing scandal, the erratic behavior she's documented since moving in. She has friends in family court too." I yanked away from him. "And you're just telling me this now?" "I only found out during our walk." "Emily, I swear." The cabin door opened again and Margaret glided in. "Having a productive chat?" "I thought it best to give you privacy while discussing options." "Options?" I turned to face her. "You mean your ultimatum?" "Oh, Emily." She sighed, the picture of sympathy. "I'm only thinking of what's best for everyone. Jack's career, Chloe's stability. Surely you can see this situation isn't sustainable." "Mom, stop," Jack started, but Margaret held up a hand. "Sweetheart, I know this is difficult. But sometimes love means making hard choices. Caroline's already expressed interest in resuming your relationship, and she'd be wonderful with Chloe. Get out." My voice was barely a whisper. "Excuse me?" "Get out." Each word felt like glass in my throat. "Before I show you exactly how unstable I can be." Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment, showing something ugly underneath. Then she smiled. "I'll give you both some time to discuss things rationally. Jack, remember, the committee meets Tuesday." After she left, Jack tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. "Emily, please. Were you ever going to tell me about Caroline?" His silence was answer enough. "Mom." Chloe stood on the stairs, clutching her book. "Are we leaving?" The same question from that night. I'd packed our bags, but now with a different weight. Margaret had orchestrated everything perfectly. My past, Jack's career, custody threats, even a replacement family waiting in the wings. One wrong move and I could lose everything. I looked at my daughter, then at Jack, then through the window where Margaret stood by the lake, phone in hand, probably calling her lawyer friends right now. "No, sweetheart," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "We're not leaving." Because that's what Margaret wanted, for me to run, to prove her right, to give her the ammunition she needed. But if she wanted a war, she'd get one. I just had to figure out how to fight back without losing everything in the process. I just wasn't sure that was possible anymore. The scream woke me just after midnight. I bolted upright, heart pounding, before recognizing Margaret's voice from downstairs. By the time I reached the cabin's living room, Jack was already there, supporting his mother as she clutched her chest. "It's nothing," Margaret gasped, though her face was gray. "Just..." Indigestion. This isn't indigestion, I said, reaching for my phone. She needs a hospital. No. Margaret tried to stand but stumbled. No hospitals. I just need. Her legs gave out. Jack caught her before she hit the floor, real fear replacing his usual uncertainty. Mom! The nearest hospital is an hour away, I said, already dialing. But there's a clinic in town. 15 minutes. Margarete is found mean, desperate now. Please, I can't. My medical records. Something in her voice made me pause. What about them? The custody filing, she whispered. If they know. Jack looked between us, confused. Know what? Mom. I knelt beside her, close enough to see the sheen of sweat on her forehead. You're not really filing for custody, are you? The threats, the lawyers, it was all bluff. She closed her eyes, pain etching deeper lines in her face. I had to protect Jack. Had to keep my family. By destroying mine? The words came out sharper than I intended. You don't understand, Margaret grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. When Jack's father left, when he chose his new family, I promised myself never again. Never let anyone take what's mine. Mom, Jack's voice cracked. Dad left because of you. Not because of his new job. Margaret's laugh turned into a sob. He had such a perfect replacement family waiting. Just like you do now with Caroline. I couldn't lose you too. I stood up, decision made. Jack, get her to the car. Now. The drive to the clinic was tense, Margaret drifting in and out of consciousness in the back seat. Jack kept looking back, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. She'll be okay, I said quietly. Will she? Any of this? He glanced at me. I should have seen it. Should have stopped her. You're not responsible for her choices. In the rearview mirror, I saw Margaret's eyes open, focusing on me. Why are you helping me? After everything. Because that's what family does, I said, turning to face her. Real family. Not the perfect image you're trying to preserve. Messy, complicated, sometimes broken, but we show up. We help. Even when it's hard. Even when someone doesn't deserve it? Her voice was barely a whisper. Especially then. The clinic's lights appeared ahead, harsh against the dark country road. As Jack pulled into the parking lot, Margaret reached forward, touching my shoulder. The custody papers, she said. They're blank. I never filed them. I thought if I scared you enough. I finished for her. Like he did. Her hand dropped. But you stayed. You fought. You're stronger than I was. Jack helped her out of the car while I spoke to the clinic staff. As they wheeled her away for tests, she caught my hand one last time. Emily? Her grip was weaker now, but her eyes were clear. I'm sorry. For everything. I was so afraid of losing my family that I almost destroyed it instead. Get better first, I said. Then we'll talk about family. Later, sitting in the waiting room with Jack, I watched dawn break through the window. The doctor had said Margaret would be fine, anxiety attack combined with exhaustion, not the heart attack we'd feared. She'd need rest, care, and probably therapy. What happens now? Jack asked, his head in his hands. I thought about Margaret's confession, about fear and family, and the lengths we go to protect what we love. Now we start over. All of us. But this time with truth instead of perfect appearances. And if she can't change, then we'll deal with that too. I took his hand. Together. As a real family. Because sometimes the strongest families aren't the ones that look perfect from the outside, but the ones that survive being broken and choose to rebuild, scars and all. 3 months after the cabin incident, I stood in my kitchen watching Margaret teach Chloe how to make her grandmother's chocolate chip cookies. Not the perfect, store-bought ones she'd initially insisted on, but the messy, homemade kind that left flour on their cheeks and butter under their fingernails. The secret, Margaret said, her voice softer these days, is not measuring too precisely. Sometimes the best things come from letting go of control. I caught her eye across the counter, recognizing the deeper meaning in her words. She'd moved back to her own house 2 months ago, after completing her therapy program. The renovation story had been just that, a story. But now her house was actually under construction, being transformed from a pristine showcase into something more livable, more real. Jack came home early, dropping his briefcase by the door. Smells like heaven in here. Dad! Chloe ran to hug him, leaving flowery handprints on his suit. Grandma Margaret's teaching me the family recipe. I watched Jack's face soften at the word family. The tenure committee had approved his position last week. Despite, or perhaps because of, Margaret's final letter to them, explaining her previous actions and withdrawing her concerns. Emily. Margaret's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Could you help me with something in the living room? I followed her, noting how she no longer tried to dominate spaces as she moved through them. In the living room, she pulled out a familiar blue sweater from her bag, Chloe's favorite, the one from her father. I had it professionally cleaned and repaired, she said quietly. I know it doesn't make up for taking it, but it's a start. I finished, taking the sweater. The fabric was soft, the worn edges carefully mended. I spoke with Caroline yesterday, Margaret continued, her hands twisting together. I apologized for involving her in everything. She's engaged now to someone else. She's happy. Are you okay with that? Margaret smiled, a real one this time. I'm learning to be. My therapist says it's about accepting what we can't control and cherishing what we have instead of fearing what we might lose. From the kitchen, we heard Chloe giggle, followed by Jack's deep laugh. Something crashed, probably a mixing bowl, and instead of rushing to fix it, Margaret stayed where she was. They're fine, I said, watching her resist the urge to intervene. Yes, she agreed, then hesitated. Emily, about the wedding. I know you and Jack are planning for spring, and I want you to know I'll respect whatever boundaries you set. If you'd rather I wasn't involved. Actually, I interrupted, we could use help with the flowers. I hear you know something about traditional arrangements. Her eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears away quickly. I'd like that. Very much. Another crash from the kitchen, followed by more laughter. This time, we both walked back together, finding Jack and Chloe covered in flour, trying to clean up their mess while simultaneously making it worse. Need help? I asked, already knowing the answer. Always, Jack replied, pulling me into the chaos. Margaret hung back for a moment, watching us. I remembered doing the same thing months ago, feeling like an outsider in my own home. But families, I'd learned, weren't about perfect appearances or controlling outcomes. They were about making room for change, for growth, for forgiveness, even when it's messy. Grandma Margaret? Chloe held out a flour-covered hand. Help us fix it. Margaret stepped forward, rolling up her expensive sleeves. Yes, dear. Let's fix it together. Later that night, after Margaret left and Chloe was in bed, I found a note tucked into the pocket of the blue sweater. In Margaret's elegant handwriting, it read, "Sometimes the families we fight hardest to protect are the ones we hurt the most. Thank you for showing me a better way." I placed the note in my wedding planning folder, next to the venue details and flower arrangements. Not as a reminder of what had happened, but as proof of what could change when we choose love over fear, messy reality over perfect illusions. Because in the end, that's what family really means. Not the family we imagine, but the family we build, one imperfect moment at a time.